Let's look at the plague from Dead by Daylight. The plague, real name Adiris, was a high priestess of Babylon in ancient Mesopotamia. At just 5 years of age, Adiris, who was the youngest of 7, was left at the Temple of Purgation, and as a way to try and cope with her sorrow and grief, she held a firm belief that the gods had a plan for her. And it was at this temple that she led a life of quiet servitude, tending to the temple's gardens, preparing ceremonial meals, and polishing the ceremonial incense burners. But at night, she would always pray for some type of a sign that would reveal her true purpose. And as she grew older and became of age, Adiris would accompany the high priest during their yearly ceremony of worship to the sea goat, the god of water and creation. And it was during these ceremonies that she had felt the closest to the gods. And each day that followed, she worked incredibly hard fulfilling her duties and taking up new ones, such as aiding the priests in purification rituals. And the priests were in need of assistance more and more each day, with cleansings being done daily as a way to try and meet the large demand from outside the temple walls, where a disastrous plague had re-emerged, and within months all of the priests had contracted the deadly disease and were unable to continue the rituals, leaving Adiris to be the only one left capable enough of performing the purification rituals and trying to contain the ever-growing panic. Growing anxious before her first ceremony, Adiris visited the priest's sanctuary chamber and lit a few candles. She noticed a narrow opening in the back, and she managed to squeeze herself through the gap and reached a hidden crypt beneath the sanctuary. The crypt was completely bare, for the exception of a large statue of a woman with her arms outstretched and her hands covered in jewels and gems. And Adiris had seen this as her sign from the gods. The temple halls were flooded with followers who all dropped to their knees and bowed in her presence. She made her way to the brick altar, where she picked up a ceremonial dagger forged in silver, and her followers were intrigued by the sudden display of luxury and her youth and beauty. And as she began to recite her scripture, a woman from the back row had collapsed, and without a second thought, Adiris quickly rushed to her aid and saw the woman's feet were covered in black blisters. And without hesitation, Adiris grabbed her ceremonial dagger and severed one of her own toes, offering it to the gods and asking in return to keep the woman safe, and her new followers revered her as their new priestess. Word quickly spread of her wealth and devotion across the city as quickly as the plague did, and her followers soon began to refer to her as the high priestess of Babylon. But her faith was tested as she began to show signs of infection. Her cough became a mix of phlegm and blood, and her skin began to erupt in cysts and boils, and her four-toed foot darkened. Ashamed of her condition, she began to wear a veiled headpiece and carried a large incense burner as a way to try and cover the rancid smell of sickness that clung to her skin. No ritual would be able to save her, and as a final effort to try and appease the gods, Adiris banished herself from the city and traveled north with a few of her followers. They took refuge in a dampened cave where Adiris laid in a pool of vomit. Her foot had turned black and became so swollen to the point where she could no longer walk. The plague had consumed her and her followers. Kneeling amongst her retching followers, she recited one last prayer as the black fumes from her incense rose to the cave ceiling before being blown away by a cold breeze. Neither the body of Adiris or her followers were ever found, and many would go on to tell tales of her return, but nobody truly knew what happened to the high priestess of Babylon.